tear, including the stars of the Ravens press conference in Steve Bisciotti and John Harbaugh. Luke Jones and I, also stars of the Ravens press conference on Tuesday, the State of the Ravens, at the Terps game in College Park. Biggest game they're going to play this year, Luke, right? I mean, we can talk about Michigan State, we can talk about any of the other home games that are coming up, and there will be big games later in the year, Purdue, Wisconsin, those kind of games. But for now, for the here and now, if the Terps were to prove anything in the Big Ten, they beat theoretically the best team, and maybe not playing that way, but this brings a whole new level of confidence that I don't know that you and I would have had about this team in September or October coming into the year, based on where they were last year, to say they're 15-2 and just beat the number one team in the Big Ten at home to kick this thing off. They're going to be a good basketball team this year. Look, they're going to play in March, from what I can tell.
Well, I mean, I don't know how much it means in the big picture, in the context of you still got a lot of games to go in the Big Ten. But what I really liked about it, one, it was a very complete game. They had their issues rebounding in the first half. They cleaned that up very much in the second half, despite the fact that Indiana shot the ball extremely well after halftime. But I like the way that this team has responded, not just in this game, but going to Ann Arbor, taking care of Michigan after that nightmare of a finish against Nebraska. I mean, just an absolute nightmare how that played out.
Well, Indiana hasn't recovered from that nightmare for them, right?
Yeah, I mean,
literally.
You wonder, especially with a young team. I mean, look, Melo Trimble was going to bounce back. I wasn't going to be worried about him, but you do worry how Anthony Cowan and Kevin Herter and Justin Jackson rebound, how they respond from a game like that. And to see what this team's done now, go to Ann Arbor and beat Michigan. And, Michigan's not special, but that's still that's a nice road win. And then to take care of Indiana. And look, I mean, Indiana now is 1-3 in the conference. I mean, I'm not so sure that they're going to be anything special. I think they're going to be better as the year goes on. And I think they'll be a team that's there in the end. But this certainly changes things for Maryland, or at least wipes away some of the stink of that Nebraska game. And now you look forward and see that they're going to have a couple games on the road now. And I mean, this team's putting themselves in good position. They're 15-2. How much of that is a product of being good? How much of that is a product of not having a really imposing schedule? A lot of it's the latter. But I really liked what I saw from this team on Tuesday night. From DeMonte Dodd's defense and protecting the rim to, Melo Trimble doing Melo Trimble things, even though he struggled a little bit late in the game. Justin Jackson, we've seen what he's offered. And Kevin Herter, it's amazing. He's only averaging about 8 points per game, but it feels like so many times this year when they need a big shot, for being a freshman, he has a knack for knocking it down. And that shot he hit with less than 2 minutes to go to give Maryland the lead, gets the rebound, a beautiful outlet pass to Anthony Cowan for the layup. I mean, just a 30-second sequence there where you see why he was Mr. Basketball in the state of New York a year ago. Really, really impressive, and just all around a good team win. I think you can look at contributions from all of their starters over the course of the night and say that that was just a quality win and a really important win to get at home.
Luke, I think expectations were lower, right, for this team. Sure. I don't think anybody expected 15-2 and wins over Indiana. I don't think anybody expected them to lose to Towson or Howard or whatever earlier in the year. But I think everyone thought this would be very choppy going into the Big Ten. A lot of the teams are not loaded for bear this year. I mean, everyone I talk to in the Big Ten says, well, Big Ten's down a little bit this year. And I think that's a little bit obvious if Indiana is your quote-unquote best team and is starting to get rocked before we're even 2 weeks into the year, right? And I know Purdue, Wisconsin, these other teams will come on. I see it as maybe a balanced conference, and every night's going to be one of these dogfights where, there's no dominant team. But I was led to believe after all the defections last year and the whole NBA-ification of what they did last year, that this would be a year of lowered expectations. And I think you and I talked about lowered expectations. And that being said, I don't expect this team to win the national championship the way maybe I had hoped last year's team could, but I thought this was going to be one of those scratch and claw to maybe get into the tournament and be playing Big Ten weekend, having to win a certain amount of games. And maybe it'll still be that way. And maybe at some point they'll lose 4 or 5, and they're about to play 4 or 5 on the road, by the way. But I don't know. The more I see them, the more confidence I have. Like you said, the more I see Cowan, the more I think he's going to get better. The more I see Justin Jackson and Herter, and I'm going to say they're going to get better. And more than that, DeMonte Dodd's gotten better, right? I mean, I think we've seen some of these guys get better. I don't know where we are with Tchaikovsky or whether he's going to cut back at all, but that would be a real shot in the arm to get him back last week of February, first week of March, and have the team be in some sort of position where they're 24-8 or something like that looks like they could be a 5 or a 6 seed or whatever it would be, and to have that sort of thing help them out.
Well, I mean, they definitely need to get Tchaikovsky back. I mean, right, you can get away with it, but, I mean, this team right now is thin in the front court. I mean, LG Gill's not exactly an overly physical presence. Yvonne Bender gave them, I think, 5 or 6 minutes on Tuesday night. Dodd played great defense. He's not going to give you much offensively. I mean, finished with 6 points, but had 6 blocks, 6 rebounds, played tough defense at the rim, did a nice job against Thomas Bryant. That was an impressive performance from him. And we know Dodd's not a star. We know how frustrating he's been for a large portion of his career. But, that's the one thing. They need to get Tchaikovsky back. Turgeon had described him as a game-time decision. They announced it about 20 minutes prior to tip that he wasn't going to play. But you get him back. You're feeling better about the front court. This team, as you said, the expectations were never going to be remotely where they were last year. Let's face it. Based on the way it turned out, the expectations were too high last year because you had a lot of talented individual parts, but it never meshed. And how much of that was personalities, how much of that was coaching, how much of that was just not having time to grow together. Probably a combination of all those things. But that's where you do get excited with this team, knowing that okay, even if you tell me Melo Trimble's gone after his junior year, fine. Well, we saw Anthony Cowan go to the rim and do things that remind you a lot of Melo Trimble. We've been seeing that since the beginning of the season. So you like what you have with him. You like what you have with Justin Jackson, who has that really enticing combination of being able to hit outside shots, but has long arms, has athleticism, has some physicality that he can be a multi-threat kind of a player. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, I mean, Kevin Herter, the numbers haven't been overwhelming for him, but you see a guy who gets it. He really understands basketball, and I thought it was interesting. Turgeon talked about this after Tuesday's win, that asked about the outlet, the great pass that he made to Cowan for the layup after he had hit the 3 on the previous trip down the floor, and he mentioned, this is a guy who played a lot of point in high school. He handled the ball a lot. He understands the game really well. It's just we're not in a position where we need him to play the point at all. So, you have these 3 freshmen who nothing to this point, other than moments here and there where, hey, they're human, just like any other player, but you haven't had a sense very often whatsoever that anything's too big for these guys. And, it's a natural progression. You start with, okay, first exhibition game, first non-conference game, then you get into first time playing on the road when they played the game at Georgetown, and you get into conference play, and you keep waiting for these guys to wilt. And it really hasn't happened.
Well, they wilted in the Nebraska game, so they did wilt once, but then they've picked it up since then, and I don't think they're going to blow a 12-point lead again with 5 minutes left at home. I just don't think that'll happen, and I think Turgeon made some great points after the game about, that being a defining moment to say, we're not going to let that happen again, that we learned from that we grew from that, and I think that's all you can ask for a bunch of freshmen out there running around with low expectations that are getting higher every day, quite frankly. I sort of expect them to do well on this little road swing. I expect them to win 4 of the next 5 or something, right?
Well, I mean, and just, go to the point you just made, I mean, for me, you're going to have times where you play poorly. I mean, that's anyone. but I like how they've responded to that. Is my point. Instead of seeing them, seeing the freshmen kind of go into a little bit of a slump where they're not playing with confidence, they're turning the ball over, things of that nature. So that's where you do really like this team from a standpoint of, look, I'm realistic, and I know that 15-2, based on the record that they've had compared to other teams that might be 15-2 and have played a couple top 15 teams and have a more impressive non-conference schedule. So it's not, it's apples to oranges in some ways. Do I think 15-2 is really indicative of the overall quality of this team? No, I don't. But because they do have some young players that are really contributing a lot, and you get the feeling are only getting better, that's where, and we talk about this all the time. We talk about this with every team in the nation, whether you have, veteran coach, great coach, new coach, young players, old players, whatever. You want to be better in March than you were in November and December. And to me, this team profiles perfectly in that regard if they can get a little healthier. And certainly Tchaikovsky and Dion Wiley didn't play, and they was battling some illness recently, and whether that's some of it's performance related, some of it's just physical, who knows. But they've got some other guys that they can kind of work in here. They didn't rely on their bench very much on Tuesday night. Didn't really need to, quite frankly. But I see room for this team to get better, and that's what gets really exciting. And where that ceiling ends up being, who knows? Could this team hypothetically get really hot at the end of the season and make a run to the Sweet 16? I'm not going to say they can't, but you do get a sense, especially as you mentioned, this Big Ten being down. And I think it's important to remember, being in the middle of the pack in the Big Ten this year is not going to get you in the NCAA tournament the way most of the ratings are looking and most of the pundits are talking. So you got to be up near the top to put yourself in position to make the NCAA tournament. And based on how this Maryland team has played, based on the fact that they went to Ann Arbor and got a nice road win last weekend, and the way they've bounced back since the Nebraska stink, it bodes well for them moving forward. So this is a team that I'm still a little cautious. Still a young team. Still haven't played a ton of great opponents by any means, but this is still a team that I'm really enjoying watching, and I definitely feel they're going to be better a month, 2 months from now than they are right now.
14 games left to go in Big Ten play. They are 3-1 in the Big Ten with victories over Illinois, Michigan, and Indiana. So for me, I'll be watching when they get together with Illinois at 6 o'clock over the weekend. Iowa next week, Rutgers for the home game on the 24th, and then back out on there. They have one home game between now and Super Bowl weekend, right? So this is the toughest part of the schedule. If they're going to get tripped up and go 2-3 or 1-4, this would be that sort of time. And the Rutgers game's as close to a bye as you get in the basketball season for them, and that's coming up on the 24th. Luke Jones joining us here. He's Baltimore Luke out on Twitter, as well as Luke at WNST.net. You mentioned about Turgeon and this group and mixing these guys in. All of the players that have been key, that have gotten on the court, the top 10 players, have all made some sort of an impact, even on Tuesday night, just Brantley hitting the three, right? I mean, at a time when, the crowd was kind of jacked up. I mean, that's a nice thing for him. Gills had some good minutes. Bender's had some minutes. So he really is involving all of the guys on the bench, which is something I think last year was harder to do when they had sort of that core 7 or 8 guys that were going to get all the minutes.
Well, you have to have bench players perform. And, they didn't rely on the bench a ton on Tuesday night, but, we've seen it. Now, he didn't take any shots on Tuesday, but Jared Nickens, for example, has been shooting the ball better of late, much better than we've seen for the better part of 2 years. So you have him. I mentioned Dion Wiley not getting minutes here recently and was battling some illness a couple weeks ago. Maybe that's impact there. But, you do have to get contributions from your bench. There's no doubt about that. So that's something that's going to be very important, as you mentioned. L.G. Gill's a guy who's had his moments. Jalen Brantley, clearly with Cowan and Trimble both being able to play the point, Brantley maybe not in the position that he thought he might be in with Cowan being so good so soon. But, you need those guys to contribute. And, we talked about this late in Tuesday's game, really before Herter hit the shot and then gets the rebound and gets the assist on the layup to Cowan, that they were falling in danger of falling into that trap of relying on Melo Trimble and it being 1-on-5 late in the game. It's very clear it's going to be really difficult to win that way. Yes, in crunch time, you need a big shot. The situation. Melo's going to be that guy, and we know that, and he deserves that because he's been that guy who's come through on many occasions the last couple years. But it can't be 1-on-5. It's got to be a team game, and you have to have other guys contribute. And certainly they've gotten those contributions from the freshmen. They've gotten some contributions here and there from guys off the bench. Like we said, Tchaikovsky's they got to get him back in there. Need more size. Dodd did a really nice job avoiding foul trouble until the second half, and picked up his fourth foul, but he never was really in a position where that he was confined to the bench for an extended period of time because of foul trouble. But we know that's not often the case. We know we've seen those games where Dodd picks up 2 fouls in the first 3.5 minutes of the game, and then he's done for the first half. So Maryland's they got to get Checo back, but this is a team that they've got some players on the bench who I think are able to who have the ability to contribute, and they'll need that. Didn't really need it a ton on Tuesday night, but we know that'll be the case, especially when you look at, as you pointed out, for their next 5 on the road. You're going to need some contributions from other guys there because, even if it's not physically demanding, it's not like the NBA where you're playing 4 times a week potentially or whatever, but, that's going to be a drain. That's going to be a grind for some of these younger guys being on the road for that much over the next few weeks. So, you're going to need some of those other guys, more veteran guys, frankly, coming off the bench and making some contributions.
Luke can be reached, Luke at WNST.net. Also, Baltimore, Luke, add on to it. Anything else you want to add about the Ravens presser? I found it fascinating. Bisciotti said after the press conference that he doesn't sit at Indiana games with Harbaugh because they're rooting for 2 different teams, so they don't subject themselves to that. They were literally opposite ends of the floor after sitting together and marching together in a press conference that was, sort of winding, and I guess everybody's making their own pitchfork will be the thing that's remembered from the presser, though, right?
Yeah, I think it is. Even though, again, Steve Bisciotti clarified that to say, hey, I'm not the one holding the pitchfork. I realize the outside world is that. Yeah, he clearly wants things to be better. He's clearly not happy with what's happened. But that said, he spent a great deal of that press conference defending Ozzie Newsome and John Harbaugh, and I really get the sense that he still, at least for now, and maybe a 6-10 season or a 7-9 season next year would change that, but at least for now, you really get the sense that he has the conviction to say, hey, I believe in my guys. I realize that's not a very popular opinion right now, and I understand that, and it's easier for me to defend them when we're going to the playoffs and winning playoff games and playing deep into January, but I still believe in these men, and they're still my guys, and I think you have to, even if you don't like that, even if you're in the camp that you want change and believe that there changes need to be made for this team to get back to where it is, I think you do have to respect the conviction, and you're talking about an individual who has been a wildly successful businessman long before he became owner of the Ravens and has been very successful as owner of the Ravens. So he deserves some benefit of the doubt. As I said to you as we talked about this in the immediate aftermath of the press conference, it is a very fine line between continuity and complacency, and I think that's very real, very relevant to mention that when you've missed the playoffs 3 out of 4 years. But it's clear Steve Bisciotti still a lot of conviction, a lot of belief in his guys, and I think he feels that they're still the right guys for the job to get this thing fixed, get it right, pointed in the right direction, getting back to where they were a few years ago.
We'll continue to discuss the press conference as well as the torrid Maryland Terps at WNST.net, including on our Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, And we're always streaming live on Facebook Live as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. The Buy a Toyota Audio Vault is there 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device. You can listen anytime you want, listen to what you want, when you want, how you want, read what you want out at WNST.net. It's all brought to you by BuyAToyota.com. Our morning newspaper, speaking of reading, delivers to your email inbox at 7 a.m. each and every morning. It's powered up by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. Still $10 a month. It's 2017, working off all the pie and the cake and the cookies and the eggnog of the holiday season. I'm getting fit and trim too. PlanetFitness.com is the way to do that. Last but never least, breaking news happens first on the WNST Tech Service. That's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. And Dennis Kolatzis will be here on Thursday, driving you home, getting you ready for the SSV on WNST, getting ready for the weekend. We got a lot of football games. We're going to continue to go around the league and talk about that, as well as the Steve Bisciotti press conference and the Terps, and maybe even a little bit of Orioles. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.